Hello everyone, this is Ian Schaefer here with UDA Technologies, and we are just about ready to dive into discovering new features in the industry's most powerful QuickBooks integration. Today we're going to be focusing on the Construction Online integration with QuickBooks Online, or QBO as we're going to call it several times in the webinar. Now, as we take a look through Construction Online's QuickBooks integration today, we're also going to be kind of highlighting a lot of the main integration components for us. And to help with that, joining me today, I actually have my colleague, Holly Gibson. She's the head of sales and one of the senior product specialists as well.
Hi, everyone.
And we also have my colleague Chase, who's been working with QuickBooks and the integration and all the tools and everything like that as well. He's actually one of the senior engineers that's helped with the QuickBooks side and has been doing it steadily for a while now.
A little over a year now. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, and so of course as we're going today, we're going to be fielding several questions. As you're taking a look, I'm switching the polls right now, but you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions in the webinar. There's a section on the GoToWebinar panel flagged questions or marked questions. Open that up if you would. It looks like we've already got a couple of people who have spotted that. But just hop in there if you guys have any questions, chat them over to us, and we'll knock those out as they come in. So the three of us are going to be getting started here in just a couple of moments. Again, if you guys would, just fill out that poll for us real quick. Once we get the majority of the responses in, we can go ahead and get started. Now, brief history as we're pulling up everything for you guys today. UDA Technologies as a company, we've been in business now for almost 20 years. And in that time, we've actually accrued close to 650,000 users, I think. We're working with companies and customers at this point pretty close to it in about 80 different countries. And QuickBooks has actually been a primary feature and function for us because I'd say probably close to about 80% of our client base is currently using QuickBooks for accounting. After that, we've got some clients who are using other online systems like FreshBooks or Xero. We have some companies or some customers using like the Sage family of products. But today we're focusing primarily on QuickBooks, which for me is a huge hot point because I'm also one of the QuickBooks Pro advisors. And I've been with the company for 10 years. UDA Technologies has actually been a gold certified QuickBooks developer for almost 15, I believe. So we've been working with QuickBooks, and we've been number one in the industry for construction QuickBooks accounting for the majority of that decade and a half. So today we're going to be sharing some of that experience with you, and hopefully for those pro advisors that we have here joining us today, we'll also provide some additional tools and resources that you can share with your construction clients to answer any of their needs as they come up. Now, along those lines, let's go ahead and dive in. So we've got a great series here for you guys today, or a great set of topics, and we're going to start within the main Construction Online system here, where we've actually come into our Construction Online overview. Well, Holly's, really. This is Gibson Construction, and Holly's overview is going to provide us a quick overview for all of the financial information that we're storing for Construction Online right now. Now, if you saw the big picture for all of our Construction Online users, this estimate total is probably going to be somewhere closer to about 80 billion. Right now in Holly's company, we're looking at 8 million in estimated costs. These are going to be a combination of live projects. We've got some that are just getting started, some that have already gone live, and as we actually dive into the budget versus actuals portion, you'll start to see the distribution of payments that we're making on these. Paid versus remaining is going to show income. So this is going to start to take us through, there we go, this is going to start to take us through some of the money that we're making on this with the paid versus remaining portion. We'll also have budget versus actuals to show exactly that, how much we've spent, how much we've targeted, and then the contract summary. Again, this is a fantastic overview tool to give you big picture. Now, as we're kind of diving into the specific information, Holly, if you would, take over for a moment. We were just talking a moment ago about one of these jobs that we have set up that we're going to be running through today. So if you would, could you guide everybody to the project and where they're going to find some of these major integration features in Construction Online?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So when we're looking at our company overview, so, as Ian mentioned, right now we're in my main Gibson Construction account, and what we want to see here is that big picture information, all of my project information rolled up into some of these really great dashboards to be able to get a really high level view of how I'm doing on my different jobs. What we want to do next, though, is actually dive into a specific project so that we can take a look at a little bit more detailed information. Here's where we want to see the estimate, the actual budget amounts versus actual spent for that one particular job, to be able to really dive in and look at the health of that project overall. You can, of course, always select the project from right here on the left-hand side. For today, I'm going to just go ahead and select here. I've got my estimate for our new project. So, like Ian mentioned, you may be looking at projects that are in different phases. So we may have jobs that have been going for a while. With what we're going to step through with you guys today, we're going to look at a project that really is just getting started. We've reached a point with this new job where we have created our estimate. We have a signed contract. So that's normally what happens next, is that we create an estimate, we make a proposal, we get a signed contract, and it's at that point that we would typically then begin to look at accounting and integration. What we want to do next with that estimate is, of course, start to track how are we staying on, in line with our budget, what's going on with this job. So it's usually right after you get that signed contract that we really want to start and look at the accounting integration.
Mm-hmm. And with this, by the way, as we're working through this, there's one of the questions that came up already was, is this going to focus on online only, or will we cover QuickBooks Desktop? The beauty of this is we actually have the same features and functionality for both platforms, and it actually behaves almost the same way. And part of the reason why we have it set up that way is because we know that there's a lot of time currently spent in today's construction industry with the all too unfortunate double entry. People are going through and they're putting together all of this work to get a strong estimate in place, or for us, the beginnings of the estimate here. We're applying markups, we're getting all the items in place, and so on and so forth. And in some cases, I've found that some of these companies will spend hours every week taking this information that they've already taken the time and invested in entering in all of this data into the Construction Online estimate or the ConstructionSuite estimate. They'll do the same thing when they're going over to QuickBooks, and it's, again, sometimes as much as 10 or 15 hours a week just re-entering the same thing.
And additional work, that's exactly right. So when we think about where we are with this project and why accounting integration is important, why this is an important thing for you to consider, or for those pro advisors out there, for you to really advise your clients to consider. That is really one of the top things that we want to look at, is the amount of time that companies are spending on that double entry is time that just doesn't have to be spent. It's something that can be alleviated with a couple of clicks. Now, a couple of other things we want to think about with the accounting integration kind of overall, and really, like you said, this applies to accounting integration between QuickBooks Online and Construction Online. It applies to integration with QuickBooks Desktop, but you're going to have a few other main benefits that you'll see. So in addition to eliminating that double entry, you're also going to eliminate the possibility for errors or mistakes. So anytime you're having to do that much hand data entry, there's definitely a possibility of mistake, and I would actually go a little further and say there's the likelihood of an error. We're all human, so whether it's yourself or someone that you've hired to go in and enter that data, when you're taking something as detailed as an estimate for a construction project, creating it once and then hand creating it again in the QuickBooks account, there really is just a high likelihood for error. So what an integration like this does is it really eliminates not only all of that double entry, but it means that the information that does get transferred is 100% accurate. So we're looking at less time but higher accuracy. So definitely a lot of benefits to be had there. And then when we think about further on into the process, as we start to look at some of the job costing, it really also eliminates the delay that many clients face in understanding the profitability of their job, understanding where estimates versus actuals are falling, rather than having to wait until you have more time to dive into that information or really analyze that data. And accounting integration, like what we're offering here, is really going to empower you or your team to be able to have that information at hand regularly, which is really what you want to do as you're kind of managing that project, is to make sure that we don't wait till the end to see if something is slipping over budget or if something really needs our attention.
And so what that looks like then, to begin with, it's all about the setup. And so from here, if we go into, again, one of these projects within Construction Online, there's a section here marked Accounting Integration. Now there's a number of different ways that you can get here, by the way. I'm using the entry point from within the project. For me, it's always been a little bit easier to get to. It works well. I'd like to start here. Now, as we're going into this process, most of this starts, again, right here when you're first getting started. I'm going to disconnect us for the moment so that we can start from the beginning, as I hope most of you will. But when you come to the Accounting Integration tab, it takes you right here where it says your Construction Online account is not linked yet, but it gives you an option to do it using this handy little button. Now again, the questions are coming through already. We're taking a look at QuickBooks Online right now. We can take a look at the QuickBooks Desktop integration at the end as well. The process and the selections that I'm about to make are almost identical. As we're working through them, the only difference is, do you push the buttons here on the web page, or are we going to push it through our little desktop helper? So again, both of these are going to be helpful. As I mentioned, today we're working with QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online, by the way, has come a long way in the past several years. It is a fantastic tool for managing. The convenience of being able to pull this up or use the app is second to none. So as we're looking through this, we want to make sure that all of these great features that we're going to interface with through QuickBooks are set up the way I, as the accountant for Gibson Construction, am happy with. So again, what we're looking at first is how do we want to tie into what we have in QuickBooks Online. First, outgoing accounts. When I buy something for a project in Construction Online, or for any of the projects that we have, the very first thing that we want to decide is what account catches that update. Now in my case, I like to use a single account. I'd recommend a lot of you do the same because you probably already have the P&L and your COGS account set up the way you like. We'll tie into them soon, but to begin with, we just need a single posting account for these costs. Now as I mentioned, this construction is cost of goods sold. That's standard for construction. I did see earlier that we have a lot of commercial contractors here with us today, so maybe some of you will be using one of the other options available here in the list as well, maybe expenses or assets perhaps. But as you're continuing on through this, we're going to start with cost of goods sold, and then we're going to move on to the items list. This is step 2. How much detail do we use for the items, and what type of items are we using? Well, the major question that we're going to ask is, do we use time cards, or do we just buy parts as we need them? For commercial contractors, most of us might be using non-inventory parts. It's a little easier to keep up with. We don't have as many moving parts in there. But we're also subbing out most of the work, so I don't have to worry about time cards coming in or connections to T-sheets or anything like that. On the residential side, or if you do have a larger team on your commercial company, service items are going to be better. The service items allow you to upload or share these with something like T-sheets or other time tracking systems. Job Time, I think, is another that we met through one of our partner organizations. Exact Time is another. They need service items. So if you're using any kind of time tracking tools, go with service. If in doubt, use service anyway. It's just non-inventory parts plus. It's a little bit better than. Once you choose this, and of course you can use a parent item if you want to keep all of our new items separated using something like COL items. All you have to do now is click Next. Step 3, how do you want to track your income? Again, pretty simple. We're just going to have everything shared to a single income account. That by type will also be income. Again, if you're doing construction or if it's work in progress that you need to track, your accountant will have different options or choices that they're going to want you to select in this case. But again, for the lion's share of us here today, we're going to be using an income account and just one, and now we click Finish. Now, again, at this point, since we're working with QuickBooks Online and we're maintaining this live connection between the two, so every time you push a button in one, it updates the other, we need to verify that connection now. This does mean that we have to log into QuickBooks Online through this handy little interface. And so I'm going to choose the option to connect right now. The beauty of this is I already logged in this morning, so it knows that I'm a valid QuickBooks Online user, and I was able to pull the information for us here. Now we're connected. Again, 3 simple questions, 3 simple answers. Now we're moving forward. At this point, within any individual project, all we need to do is connect our customer, connect our job, and then we can start all of this pushing and pulling of information between the 2 platforms. Again, none of it takes more than a moment. So as we're working with this, Connor is our customer on this job, so the first thing that we need to do is assign the customer and link it up with somebody in QuickBooks Online. So here we see list of client link users. I'm choosing Connor for the project. It's not a hard choice. We only have the one.
We only have one client, right?
Yeah. So as we select that, QuickBooks, by the way, QuickBooks Online only allows you to have one primary customer. Construction Online gives you the option to have as many different people as you need. So if we were to put Connor's wife in the system, we could have both of them available in Client Link. We could have their kids. We could have their siblings. Anybody we want. They might have an owner's rep or something like that too. They could all be Client Link members, but we still have to pick one for QuickBooks. Now, if Connor already existed in QuickBooks, we could actually link up with that existing customer here. It pulls from our complete QuickBooks Online customer list. So if I just want to tie into an existing contact, we can. Again, in this case, Connor is new. So we're going to create a new one. And now we have made that connection to a customer. Our last step here is just making sure the job is there as well. And again, same as before, link this project. If it finds the project under that customer Connor Mulkerns, then great, it will use that one. Since we didn't, you'll see that the project is now created and connected. And now we've made that link. Again, 3 simple steps. And as we're working through this, now we get to just choose whatever it is that we want to do, send the information over to QuickBooks, or once we start paying bills, we can pull it back in the same way. And you'll start to see a history building under the activity log for all of the information that we're exchanging between the 2 platforms.
That's right. One thing I love, Ian, as we were going through this is that not only is it so easy because it really only took, maybe about 5 minutes, spending a little extra time on each step. So it really is a fast and easy process to get connected. You'll also notice that as we're looking at our accounting integration tab, the system really does walk you through exactly what you need to do. We can see here that all of our steps are checked off. In fact, one thing with your estimate or as you're working with the financials is that, of course, this information is always available to you in this accounting integration area. It's also going to be available to you right from the estimate itself. So as we go back to our estimate, you'll notice we have this accounting integration area here in the top right. We can see very quickly we have connected our company. We've connected our project, so we're successful here. And really our next step is going to be to go ahead and send that estimate over to QuickBooks. So you do always have this history and activity log available to you just right on the estimate sheet as well to keep you moving along and to make sure that you always know what that next step is going to be when you're working with your accounting integration.
Mm-hmm. Now at this point too, for those of you who are watching and for all the different roles that we might have in the company itself, I'm always going to recommend the same first step. After you get this project connected and you're working with this project or with this job in QuickBooks Online, of course you can go to QuickBooks Online and move it around, or you can customize it a little bit to fit. We have that link. We've got that connection to the job now, so we can start to update or touch up a little bit of the information once we get there. But again, the first step once we get that connection is to send the estimate, and it should always be to send that estimate. This is kind of like staging the project in QuickBooks Online. It gives us our starting point, and from here we could actually go to QuickBooks if we wanted to do any kind of progress invoicing. You could use that estimate from that point, or you could create your purchase orders off of that estimate if you needed to. We'll actually be sending everything from Construction Online instead, though, just because, well, that's what we're here to talk about today. But again, first step should always be get that estimate in QuickBooks.
Mm-hmm. Now you'll notice that when I choose Send Estimate, of course we have some additional options here available to us. Remember that as we're building our estimate in Construction Online, we're going to have some options in play as to how we're calculating our company's overhead and margin, what types of markups we're using perhaps for those individual line items. We also may have selection allowances that we've accounted for, and those are going to add on to that estimate. So when we're ready to send the estimate to QuickBooks, we do have the option to, of course, include that line item markup if we're using it, include selection allowances if you have those entered, and then same thing with your company overhead and margin. If you've got that entered on the estimate, you can choose to go ahead and send it over either prorated throughout the estimate or just as a separate line item at the bottom there. Mm-hmm. In this case, we haven't used any of those additional tools here, so we've got a pretty simple estimate with basic costs listed, and we'll go ahead and send that to QuickBooks now.
Now I do have a brief note about this, a reminder if you will. QuickBooks uses certain special characters when it's putting these items and these names together. Things like colons, I believe.
colons and quotation marks.
Quotation marks, yeah. So there's a few special characters that you'll definitely want to keep an eye on. If they show up in your estimate when you try to send this information over to QuickBooks, QuickBooks will usually try to abbreviate it or remove those special characters for you. But best practice here, since we always want to talk about best practices, your best practice is to just make sure that they don't exist in the name column for your estimates. If you need to be a little bit more descriptive, you have this description field, which conveniently enough does carry over to QuickBooks as well. And you can provide better detail here. What I've seen a lot of people do in the past is they'll try to use special characters to abbreviate the name to stay within some of the old QuickBooks limitations, like 30 character limits or something like that. But again, bear in mind that as we're pushing this information over, the name should be short, sweet, and simple. The description can be much larger or longer if need be, but all of it conveniently carries over to QuickBooks as well. Now, real quick, because we just sent over the estimate, it's already there, it's already in QuickBooks. One thing that I want to point out, which is probably my favorite thing, Chase, that you've actually implemented here in Construction Online, is under the activity log, not only can you see the information that's happening, and you've got timestamps and you can see who did it. In this case, I'm pretending to be Holly, I guess, when we're sending the information over. But if you click on it, it takes you into your QuickBooks Online account, and it takes you to that transaction. So if we wanted to go in and see it now, well, here we are. It's taken us right there. We can see all the information. You don't have to open it up and log in. You don't have to kind of press through 8,000 different tabs and pages and bring all these extra people in there. Again, you click a button, it takes you where you want to be.
Exactly, and you can see that every item that we had listed on our estimate in Construction Online has now been created in QuickBooks Online. It happened so quickly. I mean, really, you might have missed it. It's such a fast and easy process. Went ahead and created for us. So at this point, we had already, during our setup process, we had created our customer, created our job. Now we've created an estimate. All that's happened. And as much information as we can does go ahead and come over. You'll notice that based on the selections of my customer and information I had already entered, that I have a billing address already here. So not only is it sending over the estimate, but it's also grabbing some of that additional information for our job or for our customer as well.
And again, we don't have to re-enter any of this. Some of the best parts of the integration that we offer do that. We've taken the time that you've invested getting this information gathered and entered into the system one time, and we just pass it out everywhere that it applies. Shows up in reports, shows up in QuickBooks Online, it'll show up on the dashboards and the overviews for your customers. But in this case, we're taking advantage of the fact that that one-click push provides all of this detail that we wanted here in QuickBooks. Now, if we save the estimate in QuickBooks Online, you can actually find all of these in the products and services section as well. So you can go back through and you can enter in the additional details, again, by hand if you wanted to put new invoices together by hand or purchase orders. Or more importantly, now that we're here back in Construction Online, you can also come back to the accounting integration portion up top and include things like purchase orders if you wanted to generate a purchase order for the planning section, for example. We could actually come into and start selecting which areas we want to include and the percentage for that section that we want to include. And as we're sending these POs over to QuickBooks, you'll also have the option to select which vendor you'd like to send the purchase order over for. Now, again, when we're looking for best practices, part of the setup for your estimate should include the resource column that you've got in the estimate. Now, within the estimate, there's a section here where you can actually assign who you're going to be buying materials from, or which subcontractor is going to be providing the labor for these areas. So it should be a quick guide for anybody who needs to send this information over to QuickBooks Online. And ideally, you'll just be matching this up with the vendor that you select when you're pushing the POs over to QuickBooks. Again, it should be a one-to-one, and our best practice at this stage is make sure the resources are set so that you know who to send to and where that information should be pulling up. In this case, once again, we have this incredible, super handy little quick link so we can actually click over to and see that purchase order that was sent. Again, takes us right to QuickBooks Online, takes us right into the purchase order. Couldn't be easier. I love this too because from here, we're going to be creating bills in order to make payments on these various different areas. As we do generate that bill, you'll see that it is linked to a purchase order. And if something's changed, again, this is the nature of construction. We put together an estimate, some of the prices changed, Now we have to go in and track those price changes too. Maybe we thought that this design package was going to be $10,000, but because the customer wanted it to be so much larger, now it's going to be $12,500. Or perhaps something like the lot cost. We thought it was going to be $70,000, but because we bought the entire area, maybe now it's only $60,000. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Never know.
It could happen. But as you're working through this, of course, these adjustments mean that the purchase order has still been fulfilled. We got the number of items that we thought we would need. Now we're just kind of making some small changes here or there to make sure that the bill payments line up with what we want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, one thing before we go away from this bill or this expense that I think this is a great time to just point out is notice that when we're recording a bill or expense, what we want to make sure we're doing is using those item details. So when we're looking at integrating with Construction Online and being able to ultimately pull this information back, right? So the end goal, or kind of our next step, is going to be to pull these committed costs and these expenses back into Construction Online so that we can run some great reports. We're going to have some great information on the dashboard. We do want to make sure that we're using the details here, and I think that's one of the things that I love about the PO system and the ability to generate those POs from Construction Online is that it's a seamless process that makes an incredible amount of detail really, really easy.
Mm-hmm. And again, one of the best parts to the purchasing system that you've got available to you here, again, the question comes up all the time from bookkeepers or accountants. The question is just regarding some of these expenses that are coming through. How do we categorize them? What is it supposed to associate with? How am I supposed to know from this vendor invoice what section of the estimate to apply these costs to? Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, we've preloaded, by generating this purchase order, we've preloaded everything that you need to know. Now it's just a matter of going in and making sure the dollars line up. And once we get that in, you can come back here and import this information back again so that we can track it side by side. Mm-hmm. Now, before we show you that, really quick question. Really quick question came from the crowd about resources and where those resource options come from. So somebody's got a sharp eye, and we appreciate that. But as you're looking through the purchase order creation process, the drop down here, select vendor from QuickBooks, it does actually pull from your vendors list in QuickBooks Online. Or if you're using Socket, the desktop integration tool, it is pulling from the vendor center in QuickBooks Desktop. So these are your QuickBooks contacts. These are your QuickBooks vendors. Up top, you'll have the options that are available as well if we have vendors or resources available where it might be able to go through and line up, or you'll be double checking against these as well. With the sync options that you have available, there'll be a lot of contact exchange between the two platforms too. So these are all things to keep in mind. We can pull them, or most importantly, one of my earliest getting started processes for anybody using Construction Online is to pull all the contacts from all these different platforms. We've got them in Outlook, we've got a Google Contact Calendar, or Google Contacts, we've got QuickBooks Contacts, so many different lists. I like to merge them all together and import it all at once, just to make sure that we've got the right people. So if you've got the names lined up, it's going to help you even more. Sharp eye in that case, though. Great question there. And then as we do dive into and take a look at some of the additional information that's coming through, again, the pull is our next step. We have the ability to create content in QuickBooks at the click of a button. We also need to report off of that as well. Holly, I know in this case you've got, what did it say, $8 million worth of projects?
I do.
And that's a lot of dollars to track coming and going. So we need to do that, and we need it to be quick and easy, and from here it couldn't be easier. So as we're working through this, we've got three main types of information that we're going to be retrieving from QuickBooks and pulling in and lining up. So the first is going to be actual costs, probably the most important. This is going to help us with the estimate versus actuals, or what did we call it earlier, paid versus actuals, or budget versus actuals rather. As we're going through and looking at that, there's two major transaction types that we're grabbing from QuickBooks Online: bills and expenses. Now, Chase, as we're working through this, expenses encompass what? Credit cards and checks?
In QuickBooks there's multiple types, but there's expenses, there's checks, there's credit card charges. There may be a couple others, but there's quite a few that expenses covers.
Yeah. So if we're working with this, if we're looking through this information, tracking down all of the money that we've spent just means that we need to check these 3 boxes. Import actuals because we're telling it which type of transactions we're grabbing, bills and checks to cover all of them within that set, and then you get to choose whether or not you want to track money that you've actually spent, money that you're planning on spending, or just everything that people have claimed from your bank account. Which this might be a little bit bigger, but again, if we're trying to plan appropriately, it's a good move. So again, once we select the option that we need, just select import. Again, it's pulling this big report, and it's finished pulling all of the information in from QuickBooks pretty quickly. Again, we still have the ability to come in here and see what we grabbed from QuickBooks Online. Most importantly, though, as you take a look on the advanced estimate view, we will have, oh, perhaps it's not in this one. It is in the job costing view. And here we've got QuickBooks actuals, and if we decide to go back and import committed costs as well, you'd see the QuickBooks committed costs also. Now, of course, we sent over the PO. We made some adjustments to that when we made the bill, and so remaining is going to show you those changes. Here we've got $2,500 over budget, shows that our profit is already a little in the hole here. Here we've got $10,000 under budget, and Construction Online doesn't assume that it's finished. So we're not assuming that this is profit right now, not until we get down near the end where we start to calculate this information out. And so remaining is going to always show you the difference between the estimated cost and the actual cost, but the profit is only going to be impacted from the job costing view if we've gone over budget. Holly, you were talking about this earlier too, so if we've slipped here, we know in the very first portion of the estimate, the very first section of this job, early in this project, that we're already $2,500 upside down. We have the entire life of this project to fix that. And so this is one of the most valuable parts of the integration. It takes a moment to pull this information back in. And in that, you actually get so much more insight, so much valuable information from that one button click that allows you to be able to make corrections on these jobs much, much sooner than what I've seen on some of these projects. We've worked with customers who are just getting started with UDA because their biggest pain point has been figuring out 6 months after they finished the job that they lost a ton of money on those jobs. We never want to see that. And with this QuickBooks integration, we help you avoid it too.
That's right. We recommend that you go ahead and do that pull every time you pay bills. It's just an easy habit to get into. Anytime you're paying those bills or those expenses, go ahead and run the import. You can see the information, and you can always come back and see exactly when the last time you did that was. So if we are trying to remember how up to date this information is, we can always see today at 3:37 p.m. That was the last time this was imported. I know if I've done things since then, or more likely you're going to see that it says last week at on Tuesday at 3:37, you'll know, okay, now it's time for me to go ahead and pull that again. If you're trying to do lots of transactions at once, you can go ahead and import multiples at the same time. So you can import things like your actuals and committed costs and invoiced amounts all together. Sometimes it's nice to be a little bit more deliberate so you know exactly what changes to expect when you're looking at your estimate. Either way, super easy, and then so much value that you're getting from that information. Immediately, of course, we can see our dashboard change, so I can see exactly where I'm at here. 91%. And then, of course, when we look at the financial reports that allow us to run things like estimate versus actual, over budget reports, committed versus actual, ton of great reporting in there available for you. This is where that information is really being used.
Mm-hmm. And as we're going through and taking a look at that information too, you'll find those reports, again, under the financial reports portion, just under like the estimating and accounting integration options. Several of those reports live right here. So you've got estimate versus actuals, estimate versus invoiced, committed versus actuals, profitability reports, and things like that in here as well. As you're looking through these, of course, I am certain for those of you, the owners of the company, you're probably going to want to see those reports, the estimate versus actuals, probably weekly or bi-weekly. If you're a project manager or a site supervisor, maybe you'll just want to have access to one of those all the time. But from here, you'll be able to pull it at any time. And if you're working on cost plus projects, you'll also be able to pull something like an estimate versus actuals report save it into the project as a PDF, and then you could share it with the customer at that time as well, which gives you the ability to share some specific information with them without necessarily flooding them with a massive spreadsheet that shows every aspect of this, like all the resources, huge descriptions, the stoplights, the classifications, notes, all these different things. The information that might be a little bit more confusing for your customer, we can help them focus on that as well by providing that for any of those cost plus style jobs too, if you guys have them.
Now, speaking of your customers, the other thing we're going to want to manage is, have we gotten paid? What have we received in terms of payment? Your invoicing view is going to allow you to track that. So just like with the purchase orders, you can actually create invoices right from Construction Online. So we would be able to kind of follow the very similar type of process. Now, one thing, Chase, I know that you've added recently is this great tool that allows us to either invoice the remaining balance, essentially the remaining total of every line. We can do a percentage of each line. So we could maybe do a 20% of each line we want to go ahead and create an invoice for, or a custom amount for each of those lines, which just allows you to do exactly what it says, go in and really customize which sections you're going to use and how much of those you want to use here. We're just going to go ahead and do a percentage there. And basically it will generate that invoice for me, selecting all of my items automatically, and then just creating a 20% is what I want to do on this invoice. Notice that we could come in and check or uncheck, any of these things here. We're going to go ahead and put that back though. I like that percentage progress. It just makes it a little bit easier, but of course you can just customize that to your liking. We'll hit create, and it's going to essentially do the same thing that we've seen with some of those other options. We'll go ahead and create the invoice. It's right there in QuickBooks, and then it's ready for you to record payment on, within your QuickBooks here.
Now that's also an important one too. As you're putting these invoices together, you're going to be receiving payment in QuickBooks on those invoices. That process, receiving payment on those invoices, is how Construction Online knows to distinguish any of the invoices that we've already collected on versus the invoices that maybe we set up because we have a payment schedule that we've set aside. On this job, for example, maybe we have an agreement or it's in the contract with the customer that we get 20% upfront and then 20% per milestone that we reach at certain points. If that's the case, again, for ease of use and Holly to follow your method there, I'm probably going to go ahead and set up all 5 of these invoices in the beginning.
Yep. And
maybe just date them when I think they should come through. But this would allow us to send them out as appropriate. We could just email it to the customer at this point, save and send. Or alternatively, since we're going to be tracking this money coming back into Construction Online, this is what's going to update all of our reports and give us the big master dashboard that shows us how much money we've collected. Bigger the numbers there, the better we are, or the happier we are. But as we're pulling this information back, same as before, you choose what style we're going to pull. You select the option here to pull the information in, and in this case, you've got the option to include paid or partially paid invoices, which would allow us to pull just the money that we've collected. Now, this one's going to be an important one too, because again, if you have set up all of the invoices ahead of time, you probably don't want to include all unpaid invoices because then it would just look like you've collected for 100%. So if you're planning ahead, make sure that you only check the option to get the paid invoices so that you can see the money you've actually collected. Or if you want to see what's left, maybe instead of using the paid option, we'll go with just unpaid invoices. Again, my goal in this case would be to see all the invoices that I've sent to my customer that they haven't paid for yet, to give me an idea what dollar amount needs to be in the email that I'm about to draft up and send to them saying they need to pay me. So again, as we kind of go through this, you've got a couple of different options here on tracking that invoiced amount, and both of them will be immensely valuable as you're going through the project. At the end of the job, I would recommend checking just the option to include paid invoices. This will also help you track what's been skipped over or overlooked or missed as you've gone through the job. Nobody wants to miss getting paid for some of the work that they did, so make sure that this is part of that closeout process that you set in place. Now, a quick note about one of these questions that came through as well. A few moments ago, somebody asked, can hours be recorded for time by including, can they be included in the committed costs? And yes and no would be kind of the answer there. It's a little bit of a difficult one because it depends on the type of time tracking tools that you use. If you're recording hours, most of that is actually going to be put together as a bill or an expense of some form. So if you've already committed those hours, if you've already used them, that's a cost now and would show up when you're importing actual costs. Now, I say that it's specific to the style because I'm fairly certain that's how T-Sheets works and some of the major time tracking tools work. Others will put it into a kind of a holding area where it may be treated more like a committed cost instead. And so if that's the case, then when you're taking a look at your committed costs, maybe at that point we would be pulling in only received, partially received, or open and partials. One of these options instead to track what's out there that we have to still spend money on. So as you're working through this, you'll be able to see some of these different options. I would recommend just taking a look at how those transactions are set up in QuickBooks Online, because again, committed costs are going to be all your purchase orders. Focus is almost exclusively on that. So if it does show up as a PO, it's here as a committed cost. If it shows up as an expense or a bill, you're pulling those in with your actual costs. And if by some miracle you've got people who are paying you to work on jobs, that's probably going to show as an invoiced amount instead. But again, as you're working through this, you'll be able to see all these options. Now, here is one advantage that Construction Online currently has over QuickBooks, over ConstructionSuite Desktop. We offer two outstanding platforms, or as William Murphy from Intuitive Accountant calls it, two tremendous integration options. But as we're looking at this one, Construction Online actually gives you the ability to pull in all of the information for this project all at once. You can just pull up this form, select everything to import, and then click the button here. You still get all three entries under the activity log, and you'll see it kind of going through and letting you know what's left out there or what fits this import style. In this case, the committed costs, I chose only open POs, but we closed that one earlier to make that bill, so there are no open POs, and it told us as much. But again, as you're walking through all of this information, do it all at once. It's, in this case, 2 button clicks that the accountant or the bookkeeper would press. You don't have to log into QuickBooks for it. You just click the button and you're good to go. Now, where does that put us today?
So I think one thing, when we look at that whole process of creating our POs and working with our vendors and really managing all of this information, another question that comes up pretty frequently is, I just need a place to see, who I owe money to, how much I paid them already, and how much I still need to pay. And we've actually created something that allows you to see that on a vendor by vendor basis. So when we're managing and tracking the budget or estimate for a project, we really want to do a lot of that, of course, right here on the estimate. We want to be able to compare what we forecasted with what we're spending, track the budget. We're really looking at the project, and we're looking at the items that we have listed here, these different categories. The vendor transaction section gives us an alternate way really of viewing that information that's centered around the vendor. So this allows us to really center that information around the specific vendors, what we've committed to pay them, how much we've billed, how much we've actually been paid, and then what the balance is, or how much we've actually paid out rather, and then what the balance is. What do we still owe this vendor?
Right, and so this is actually going back to the QuickBooks Online information. What this is showing us right now is, again, we've got a bill for $78,000, but we haven't paid him yet. This is outstanding, so I know that this money is pending. This is going to go at some point, and it just helps us kind of keep track of that. The committed cost is fantastic here because that's kind of our original contract amount with Adam, and the amount billed may also reflect for us right now that there could still be $7,500 pending in here as well. So again, this new screen for tracking all of our subcontractor contracts or our material orders is a fantastic area because it just lines it all up for you easily based on all the information that we've got in QuickBooks. QuickBooks normally doesn't provide it this simply, and from here we're already in the project. We know exactly what's going on for this project, who the money is going to, who still thinks that they are going to collect on us later. I mean, again, this is one of the newer features on Construction Online, and has already paid in dividends for the people who have started implementing it.
Definitely, and it puts that information right at your fingertips. Now, of course, as you mentioned, we are already right here in the project, so when we're looking at those vendor transactions, we're looking at vendor transactions specific to this job. If we go back to our company overview for just a moment, we do have this same vendor transactions area that you can work with, that is not specific to one job, but rather just pulling all of our vendors and giving us that same information, only we're looking across all jobs. So if we're looking, here we're seeing now for my entire company, these are the vendors. You do have some filtering that we can do here to be able to see date ranges. So if we want to pull different date ranges there, we can do that. Mine is set for 90 days. And a really nice thing, Chase, one of the things that I love that you built into this for us is the ability to not only see this information here, but we can actually click into that information and then see exactly where these numbers are coming from. So for Adam here, if we want to click in and see, okay, he has purchase orders and bills, what do those look like? So now we can see all of the outstanding POs for Adam. So we have the one we made today, but we also have one from, looks like back in February, within that 90-day range. And if we want to see what all's included on that, we can expand further still and get a quick little view there. So you really have not only a little bit of information, but you won't have to go digging and hunting and trying to find, where these numbers are coming from or what's included. It's really going to be all right there for you to view in line as you're looking at this vendor transaction page or report here.
And again, our goal in doing this is just to save you time. The number of clicks that it might take to pull that report out of QuickBooks Online might not seem like that much as you're going through and doing it. But again, if it takes you a few minutes every time you want to pull that report, and you're interested in pulling that a few times a week, that may be 15 minutes a week that you guys are spending over the course of the 50 work weeks in the year. That's a lot of time spent clicking those buttons. Mm-hmm. Over the course of several years, it becomes days that you've spent just pulling reports out of QuickBooks. So our goal is to eliminate those days worth of wasted time and just provide all the same sort of information and that great reporting capability right here in the same place that you guys are using to communicate with all those vendors, to answer any questions that they might have through the correspondence or communication systems like RFIs or submittals or what have you, and helps us keep track of everything right here in one place with no major questions left outstanding.
That's right. Now, one thing that we know is going to happen for most of you, and that's what we hear, is that as we put our estimate together, there really are bound to be changes. So sometimes that's reflected, as we saw earlier, in kind of a difference between the purchase order and the bill, or maybe we negotiate better prices. So we'll see some of those types of changes. You'll also see changes, of course, in the form of change orders. So one of the things that we, of course, have built to allow you to manage that process is our change order management tool in Construction Online. And the way that that's going to work with the accounting integration, or with the integration with QuickBooks Online, is that we do give you several options here. And some of the ones that I love the most are the ability to actually really automate some of the process of getting that information over to QuickBooks. You guys know that in Construction Online, you can, of course, create those change orders, have those go into a portal for your client to log on and approve. And what this allows us to do is set up a workflow or some automation that defines how those change orders are handled. So what we would say is, when a change order, of course, is approved by a client, do we want to automatically send an estimate for that change order to QuickBooks? Do we want to automatically create an invoice? And same thing for when the change order is approved by you. Of course, sometimes you'll have clients logging in and making their approvals. Sometimes you'll need to go ahead and just mark that off as approved if the client's unavailable to do that. And in either case, we can go ahead and automatically send an estimate and then automatically create an invoice for that change order as part of the process there.
Mm-hmm. And this, again, huge time saver. It also helps because now everything that we need to get paid for this change order is already queued up in QuickBooks. And those notifications will be coming out right away, along with all of the automated notifications that you receive through Construction Online. Again, you have that comfort of knowing that all of the paperwork is being taken care of as soon as the customer clicks the button. We're done. All of this information is finished and ready to go. It does automatically connect in, and of course, depending on how you set up your QuickBooks Online, you have the ability to connect in through things like bill pay as well. A lot of those apps that allow you to collect payment on these things, everything that you need is going to be queued up and ready. So you don't have to worry about any of those additional steps. It's kind of a wonderful little chain of events that happens at that point. The estimate and the invoice get sent over to QuickBooks, the customer gets notified, you can set it up so that QuickBooks Online immediately sends them the link to go ahead and pay you for those change orders. All of that is queued up and ready. Again, leaving you with no additional work required to get paid for those change orders that you guys have already worked on previously.
That's right. And you can see this in action here. So while Ian's chatting, I've gone ahead and just created a quick change order in the system. So it's super easy to go ahead and create that, fill out the form. Now I have the change order pending. So based on the settings with my accounting integration, I can simply mark that as approved, or my client can go into the portal and mark that. We'll go ahead and approve it here. And now we'll begin to see that history happen right here on the change order, where we can see the change orders approved, sent to QuickBooks, and an invoice created, really all in one step. So that now I have that invoice at hand available to me in QuickBooks as well, and we're really ready to go ahead and receive payment on that right away.
Now you'll also find within these change orders, there's some additional spaces in there where we're keeping track of the payments that we've received or the income that we're receiving for these as well. When you open it up and go to the payments section, you'll see where the QuickBooks amount paid, which is going to be your invoiced amount, or the actuals, which is, again, that's bills and expenses. All of these things are going to be lined up here. When you import everything from QuickBooks, it shows here. You'll also find that the same thing is happening for anything that has a dollar amount associated with it throughout Construction Online. So if the question or concern is, will we be able to track against those allowances appropriately? The answer is yes, you will. And it doesn't change anything that we've gone over today. All of it is just included as part of that information exchange, and it's all syncing up naturally. So again, no extra work required, no extra time spent doing data entry, no concerns about typos. You never have to worry about accidentally sending a customer an invoice for a $400 fridge. I don't think I've seen a $400 fridge in 30 years, but yeah, maybe on Craigslist.
Not the last time I looked, yeah.
So ultimately, again, we're avoiding any of those really, really, really costly, simple mistakes by automating this data exchange between the two platforms. And as you're working your way through this, you'll actually be able to push and pull that information to free up some of the time by the rest of your team so they can focus on some more important tasks than data entry. It allows everybody to kind of focus on their expertise rather than busy work, which for us here at UDA Technologies has been a primary driving factor now for 20 years.
Yeah.
We're close to 20 years.
Almost 20.
Now at this point too, I believe that we've covered most of the questions that we have there, and I think we've actually wrapped up most of our content for the webinar today. So at this point, we will be reaching out to anybody else who has any follow-up questions. As always, we've recorded this webinar today, so you'll find the link available on the events page probably tomorrow morning. It should become available there, so take a look for it at that point as well. For now, though, I think that's going to be a wrap.
I think that wraps us up for this afternoon, but we definitely want to thank all of you for investing some of your time this afternoon with us and in learning about these fantastic integration options. As Ian mentioned, we will be posting the recording tomorrow. I'll also send that out to anyone registered for today's session in an email at some point during the day tomorrow as well, along with some great resources that we have for you and your clients on working with the integration with QuickBooks Online. But yeah, again, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, and take care, everyone. Have a great night.